Let's see. Okay. Right. Good morning, everybody. Well, from the South African side, good morning. And for those of you who are joining us from other parts of the world, welcome to our first Hideaways Facebook Live, which we're very excited about. And we have a wonderful guest joining us today, who is going to share some amazing storytelling and creative writing tips. My name is Kim Sparrow, and I'm part of the Hideaways creative team. I've been lucky enough to share some really interesting conversations and chats with international best-selling author Tony Park, who arrived in Africa about 25 years ago as a casual tourist and left with a professional career in writing, with Africa being a beautiful canvas for storytelling and a wonderful muse and inspiration with all these different contrasts and colors and smells. And Tony in particular spent a lot of time in Wangi National Park. And for those of you who don't know and haven't been to Zimbabwe, Wangi is our biggest national park. To put it in perspective, the size of Switzerland. So you can imagine the amount of stories in this space that are waiting to be collected and have been collected by Tony. From having conversations with local people, from spending a lot of time in the park, him and his wife, especially at Nantwich Lodge in Wangi, watching and listening and chatting and collecting these stories, which he's turned into 17 novels over time, which is amazing and has been very, very interesting to speak to. So today, Tony's going to share with us some of his knowledge about Africa and some of his creative writing skills. And if you are with us as we go along, please pop a hello, ask questions as we go along. And at the end, Tony will answer these questions for you. And then we have a little challenge, a little encouraging writing challenge at the end where some prizes are to be won. So, as we are all here to listen to Tony, Tony, would you like to take it away and share some tips with us this morning?
Great, thanks, Kim. Yeah, it's my pleasure to be here. For those of you who might be joining you from my Facebook page, some of my friends and readers, you'll know we've had a few of these Facebook Live talks recently, so that's what I've been doing on my side. For all the fans of Hideaways out there, it's great to be coming to you from this page. My wife and I and some other friends are actually investors in Nantwich Lodge that Kim mentioned, and that's how we have a relationship with Hideaways through that. But as Kim also mentioned, I've been going to Wangi National Park for about 25 years now, and in particular, in years gone by, my wife and I stayed at Nantwich quite a lot in the past. It was, for those of you who don't know, an old national parks camp, which unfortunately fell on hard times over a number of years, and has been rebirthed, given a new lease of life as a luxury lodge. Opening very soon, we hope, whenever we're all allowed to travel. Kim and I discussed what I could talk about today. I'll tell you something. I have noticed since our lockdown began where I am here in Australia, I know it's happening in various forms around the world, and my heart goes out to everybody at the moment. But one interesting thing is the number of emails and messages I have had from people in the last couple of weeks saying they want to write a book is staggering. I don't know if we're going to have a baby boom out of this lockdown, but we're certainly going to have a book boom without a doubt. I think it's probably because people have got time on their hands. I think it's because people have time to think, which is really, really important in the process of writing a book. And perhaps we're all just taking a little bit of extra time to reflect on things, perhaps on our own lives, perhaps on the lives of our parents or loved ones, perhaps on our past travels. And perhaps you, like me, are using this time to think, what can I write? Maybe I should write something. Well, It's my job. That's why I'm here. I have to write another book. I'll be quite honest with you. Normally at this time in the year, my wife and I would be in Africa. We have a house in South Africa and we use that as a base on our travels around Southern Africa. So where I get the inspiration, literally the ideas and the material and the background and the research for my books is traveling throughout the amazing continent of Africa. I am, to tell you the truth, finding it a little bit tough at the moment because I'm finding it, whenever I'm interviewed about where I get my inspiration, I say I get it through my travels in Africa. I write on location in Africa. And here I am stuck in the spare bedroom of my 2-bedroom apartment in Sydney, trying to write my next novel set in Africa. It's not easy, but neither is the process of writing a book. So what I'd like to share with you today is a few tips, hopefully a few ideas, maybe a little bit of inspiration if you are thinking of writing or you've ever been curious about writing. Hopefully I can share with you a few pointers. Most importantly, maybe I can give you the incentive to get started. For my readers who've been tuning into my earlier talks, I thought it might be interesting for you also to just get a little bit of an insider's view as to how I go about doing my job. And I'll do that by talking about a couple of the books that we haven't covered in the previous talk, so there won't be too much double up. I will start by saying that I have no formal training as a writer. I worked as a journalist on newspapers, which helps in some way if you're going to write fiction or perhaps a non-fiction book. Perhaps you're interested in writing your memoirs or a parent's memoirs. There's elements of journalism that maybe help a little bit in the writing process, but you certainly don't need to have had any formal background or training in writing to have a go. It's a skill most of us are fortunate enough to be able to do. But there are some special techniques and tricks that I will cover. So while I don't have any formal training and I never did any creative writing process, but you certainly don't need to have had any formal background. Quite late in my process of writing, I came across a book called On Writing by a guy called Stephen King. He's Stephen King, the horror writer. You may have heard of him. Incredibly well-known, best-selling US writer. Now, to tell you the truth, I don't read Stephen King's books. I'm really not at all interested in horror or the paranormal or scary books. And I make no apology for that because I don't think anybody should tell you what you should read or shouldn't read. But my mother-in-law, who's a keen writer, put me onto this book many years ago and ordered me to read it. Now, I put it off for a year or two. I said, I don't want to read any book by Stephen King. She said he wrote this non-fiction book called On Writing, which is basically how to write a book. She said, you must read it. So I put it off for a year or two. I wrote several books. I probably had written about 4 or 5 novels before I actually got around to reading this book. Well, let me tell you, it's not a big book. Half of it is his autobiography, and the second half is how to write. Fiction, non-fiction, doesn't matter. You want to write a book, this is the book to read. I reread this book every year before I start work on another book. This is my well-thumbed, annotated version of the book. In fact, I have another copy of it in my house in Africa. That's how much I love this book. Anyway, so a lot of what I'm going to talk to you about today, I will give credit where credit due, comes from Stephen King, who wrote this very good book on writing about how to write a book. The most important thing that I can tell you about how I work and the process of writing a book comes down to 3 words. If anyone's done any creative writing classes or lessons, you may have come across these 3 words. I was having a discussion with someone recently about tattoos. I don't have a tattoo. I made it to 55 without one. I think maybe I should get one. I don't know. If I did, these are the words I would have tattooed, probably somewhere where I could read them on my wrist. Show, don't tell. Okay. This is the most important thing if you're going to write a story. Whether or not you're writing a novel or your parents' memoirs or a story about your own life, if you're trying to convey something to someone in an entertaining, hopefully interesting manner, in a creative manner, it's very important that through your writing, you try as hard as possible to show your readers what it is that you're trying to communicate. If you're seeing your story played out like a movie in your mind, or you're reliving past experiences, you almost want to think of it like a little film, like a little movie going through your head. And how can you put that into words? The challenge in writing is to make somebody want to keep turning the pages and to keep reading what's going on. And there are a few elements that are really important in that process. It takes a little while and constant reminding on my part to keep that message front of mind. Constantly when I'm writing any of my novels, any of my 17 novels, I'm thinking show, don't tell. I know what Nantwich Lodge in Wangi National Park looks like. I can smell it, I can hear the birds, I can feel it, I can feel the changes in the temperature, but how do I put that into words? It's not easy, but that's my job. And if you say I can't put it into words, this amazing experience I've had, well, then you have to go away and try again until you can, because that's the business of writing. But there are certain things that we can use, certain ingredients that make it easier rather than to show rather than just tell someone. Now, I'm a storyteller. I'm not saying you can't tell a story. That is the job. And sure enough, part of any book is the story. You have to get across the story. You have characters, you have a situation, but those characters have to get from point A to point B, and they have to do certain things, whether it was in real life or whether it was in fiction. So there is an element of your story which is called narration. Okay, the narrative. Somebody will be telling this story at some point. You can't just show it. It's not a movie. Okay, so how do you tell your story? You can have a narrator. It's what's known as the omniscient narrator, I think is the term. Someone in your story who sees all and tells all. Or what you can do, it's probably more common in the type of thriller novels that I write, is you have your various characters in your story, and they each take a turn during the story, during the novel, of telling the story. So we get the action, we get the plot, we get the idea of the story from their point of view. Right now, you've probably just picked up on that word called plot. What's the plot of the story? Who knows that? I'll tell you the truth, I don't know. When I start writing a book, I do not have a plot. Many writers, certainly anyone, most of the people who've written textbooks about how to write will tell you that a plot is essential. I don't think it is. If you're sitting at home with time on your hands during the lockdown and you think, I want to write a story, but I don't really know how it will end or what's going to happen, don't worry. Just start writing. You might be like me and find that by just starting to write, making up events, making up characters, delving into your memory, that the story, the narrative, the plot will just come to you as you write. That's the way I write. I think it's more fun than knowing the beginning and the middle and the end of the story. So I don't teach people about how to plot a story. Unfortunately, when I speak at a lot of high schools, the teachers all tell their students, you have to map out your story, have the beginning, the middle, end before you start. And I stand up on stage and say, don't worry about that. And the teacher gives me daggers. They look at me thinking, I don't know what I'm talking about. But someone has to tell the story at some point. The trick is to make that as entertaining as you can. Now, in this book, Scent of Fear, I start off with an actual narrator, someone who is not, a main player in the book. Well, he is in a way. And during the book, he pops in and out to tell the story. The other really important thing when you start off to write your book, is a good start, a good opening line. So the opening line of this book is, I hate cats. Now, if you're a cat lover, don't worry, because the second paragraph says, don't worry if you're a cat person. I'll win you over. I tend to grow on people. Sure, I have my faults. I'm messy. My farts stink. And my best friend says all I think about is eating and chasing tail. Oh dear, this sounds like a disgusting, crude individual. If you've read this book, you may know, or you may have guessed by now, that the narrator is a dog. This is a book about tracker dogs in the Kruger Park who are chasing down poachers. So your narrator doesn't even have to be a person. It doesn't have to be one of your characters. But for the rest of the book, what happens is each character takes a turn at telling the story and saying where the action is moving. So a narrator is part of the story. But if we get back to show, don't tell, what you want to do is flash up some images in the reader's mind to get them thinking. How do we do that? if you ever think about it, it's pretty straightforward. You've got to be able to describe. So description is your second key ingredient. Show, don't tell is what you got to think all the time. You need a little bit of story, someone telling you what's happening, where they're going, what they're doing. But description is very important. My novels are all set in Africa, and I think it's fair to say that the continent and the various countries within the continent, the various locations, do form an important part of the story. I think that's why a lot of people read my books, quite frankly, not because they like my writing, but because they like Africa. And I'm A-okay with that. No problems at all. Now, description is a funny thing. You want to get the balance just right, okay? These are thriller novels that I write. As Stephen King says in his book, in a thriller, the story is the boss. What will hopefully keep you turning the pages is the action, the adventure, the romance, the suspense, what's going on in the book. The description is important because you may be reading this book, Safari, because you like Zimbabwe, and you like some of the countries that are mentioned in here, and the mountain gorillas get to go in there later in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So you might be buying the book for the locale, but probably what keeps you turning the page is the story, hopefully. There's a big question in this book. This is a book about hunters and poachers, and the hunters are hunting something. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but that's a big question that looms in this book. Sometimes known in writing circles as the hanging question, but that's a whole nother lesson for another day. Let's talk about description. This book is partly set at Nantwich, as Nantwich was in the past, as a national parks camp. Now, one of the things that I loved most about the old Nantwich Lodge, it was a very small camp. It just had 3 two-room bungalows. That's all there was there. And they're now three bedrooms in the new lodge. But each room or each lodge had an outdoor bathtub. And the outdoor bathtub was positioned next to an outdoor wood-fired boiler, what they call a donkey boiler in Zimbabwe. And it was possible to sit in that bathtub just on dusk, under the stars, as the stars and the moon were coming up, maybe see some game down at the waterhole and have a lovely hot bath outdoors. So I thought anyone who's been to Nantwich will remember that. And so I want to put that in as a description of the camp. And in the new lodge, we've actually kept the old bathtub. So every room has an outdoor bathtub. So I thought I'd write a scene about an outdoor bathtub. So I've got my lead character. She's a lady named Michelle. Now she's going to have a bath in the outdoor bathtub. The hot water was already close to boiling. The fire roaring like a distant freight train in the furnace next to her. The bricks giving off a pleasant warmth to counteract the mildly cooling effect of the breeze as she hooked her wet towel over some plumbing and lowered herself into the water. A kudu raised its big ears at the pop of her beer can. She's taken a beer into the bath like I used to. Research is very important. Even though she was a good 200 metres from the waterhole where it drank, the animal settled back down to drinking the muddied water. Bliss, she said aloud, taking a long swig, then slid down to wet her hair. As she closed her eyes and lathered, her only regret was that there was no one there with her to share this magical experience. Well, who knows what's going to happen to Michelle. So that's Michelle having an outdoor bath. Description. When you describe something, probably generally when you describe a memory or something to someone, don't we tap into our senses? When we're writing, we really should. If you're going to describe something, you should engage all of the reader's senses: taste, touch, sound, smell, hearing. You don't have to have all of them because then it might be overloaded. One of the pitfalls with description is too much. You don't want too much, just enough. So when Michelle's bathtub, she feels the hot water. She hears the fire burning in the donkey boiler like a distant freight train in there. We hear the pop of the beer can. We see the kudu drinking, looking a little bit startled down there at the waterhole. And she speaks. She says bliss, one word. That's all she says. One word of dialogue, okay? So there we kind of hopefully set the scene for a bathtub. So if you're writing your story or your parents' story or making up a novel, don't forget some description because that's what readers want to read about. If you've been somewhere on your trip and you want to put that in your book, then try as hard as you can to engage as many of those senses to make sure that you can put the reader in that position. Remember, show, don't tell. You could just say Michelle got in the bathtub and washed herself. Pretty boring, okay? But by engaging, turning on those senses, we're putting people in position. Kim's looking at me like I've got to speed up. Don't worry, Kim, I'm going to make it. You heard me mention the word dialogue before. Michelle sits in the tub with her can of beer, cracks it open, and she says bliss. Hopefully for you, that gives you a feeling of Michelle's state of mind at the time. Because the other thing you need in a story, even if you're writing your memoir, even if you're writing non-fiction, is dialogue. Dialogue is very important, just as it is in a movie. What did people say? What do your characters say? What your characters say can even act as a description of them. There's a lot of double up here. It can tell us, their words can tell us a lot about them, can't they? This is a book called Captive, which came out the same year as Scent of Fear, I think last year before, 2018. Captive's about a drunken vet in South Africa, a bit of a rogue, and an idealistic young woman from Australia. Her name is Kerry Maxwell. Kerry Maxwell, hopefully you're listening out there. Real people have their names used as characters in my book. They pay money to charities for the right to have their names used as characters. Anyway, so what I want to do is just give you a little bit of dialogue, just to show you, rather than tell you, what I mean about how what someone says, what a character says, can tell us a lot about them. So if you're writing Granny's life story, try and think of what Granny would have said when she was traveling through the African bush back in 1940. Or maybe she told you a story on her lap that you can relate in the book. Because even if you're writing non-fiction, we need dialogue to show what things were like. So here's chapter 1 of Captive. Kerry Maxwell, who's from Australia, is on a plane and she's flying into Skukuza in the Kruger National Park. Kerry Maxwell looked out the window of the jet and gasped. She turned to the man in the khaki uniform of the South African National Parks across the narrow aisle. It's a giraffe. And there's even an exclamation mark after Kerry's statement. Sorry, she said, feeling a little self-conscious. You must see Giraffe every day. He laughed, his big beer belly shaking. I wish. I work in Pretoria in an office mostly. I'm almost as excited as you to be back in the Kruger Park. This is your first visit? She nodded. I'm so excited. Do you mind if I ask, where are you from? His accent was Afrikaans. China, he said. It was her turn to laugh. No, Australia. I'm part Vietnamese. So, in the opening section of that book, we have established that Kerry's is a first-time visitor to Africa. Why? Because she gets terribly excited about seeing a giraffe. So even before we've said she's a first-time visitor, we kind of know. And then she says, I'm excited. And her name is Kerry Maxwell, but the guy seated across the aisle says to her, where are you from, China? So we get an impression that Kerry has an Asian Oriental look about her, and we find out from her own words that she's part Vietnamese. He then goes on to tell her about the problem of rhino poaching and things like that, and she has to put him back in his place. So you see, if I had told you about Kerry, I could have started this book by saying, this was Kerry Maxwell's first trip to South Africa, and she was very excited, especially when she saw her first giraffe. Pretty boring, yeah? But by putting it into direct speech, using a bit of dialogue, we have described Kerry as a person. When you describe people and places, my advice, my tip is don't overdo it. Don't go into minute detail about what someone's wearing or what they look like or their physical description. Leave a bit up to the reader's imagination. So there's a few introductory things to get you going. The most important one, as I said, being show, don't tell. If you use a bit of judicious narration, the right amount of description, not too much, not too little, use all the senses, invoke all the senses, or as many as you can when you describe something, and then throw in a bit of dialogue. That should hopefully get you started on writing your story. Kim, over to you.
Tony, that is so wonderful to hear. So being a writer myself, or just starting out actually in my writing career, I've made so many notes here and I can't wait to give it a go. We've had some interesting questions along the way. So the first one is, I see Michelle Keefe there from Victoria Falls in Zimbabwe. Beautiful place for writing, as you know, just outside of Wangi there. is asking about, she finds it difficult to get into the zone. So how do you get into the zone for writing? And having written 17 African novels, obviously Africa gets you into the zone, but how do you get yourself there?
Great question. Really, really good question. Michelle, this is my job, so I don't have a choice. I have to get in the zone. Some days you get up and go to work and it's like a chore. And some days, I guess, when we all can get back to the office, maybe for the first time in our lives, we'll be happy to get back to the office after this lockdown. Some days you can't wait. And so it is with writing. So what I find, it's a simple answer. It's not a very inspiring answer. It's not very exciting. It's routine. I get into the zone by having a routine. As far as possible, I write at the same time each day, which is usually mid-morning after I've got up and wasted a bit of time checking my emails. If I'm in the bush, I'll go for a game drive in the morning. I'll do something fun. I'll exercise. I'll get my body and my mind working a little bit, even if it's checking emails. And then my zone is to start work mid-morning. And then what I do is I have a daily quota that I have to write. 4 pages a day, which works out to about 1,500 words. And that's how I get in the zone. I know that if I work diligently and hard and fast, I can knock off early, I can finish work early. So my record for writing 1,500 words being in the zone is about 45 minutes at one end of the spectrum. At the other end of the spectrum, it's about 8 hours. It can take me that long to write my daily quota. This is a big undertaking if you want to write a book. It's going to take a lot of your time. And I know personally that if I can find a certain amount of time, it doesn't have to be 4 pages, it could be 1 page a day, but if you can get into a routine, I know that having a routine helps. And one final quick tip to keep you in that zone is never finish at the end of a chapter. Never finish at the end of a paragraph. When you've done your daily quota, stop in the middle of a paragraph, in the middle of a sentence, and then put your computer or your notebook away, go and do something fun. Tomorrow, when you start again, you're picking up where you left off. You never want to face a blank page the next day. Good question.
So I have a question off that question. So now you're in the zone. So say you're sitting at Nantwich and you're writing, or you haven't started writing yet. How do you find the stories? How do you choose what to write? There's so many stories, especially in Africa, coming at you. How do you narrow it down to one?
Yeah, it's hard, Kim. It's probably easier to sort of tackle that question the other way around. Yes, there's so much happening. I mean, I've seen so many amazing things, but when I hear something or read something or I'm having a beer with someone around a braai, or I read something in a paper or hear something on the radio, I know as soon as I hear that there's a story there. I wrote another book set in Wangi called The Hunter, which is about people faking their own deaths. And I got that from a private investigator having a beer with him around a braai. And as soon as he said that, I thought that's a book. And then also it can just be things that happen that stick in your mind. And as a writer, I guess you have your radar on all the time. I saw my first lion kill ever at Nantwich. The first time I actually saw one predator kill another animal was 7 lions that took down a buffalo outside Nantwich. I was having lunch. My wife and I were literally sitting at the table.
That's quite a lunch to top.
And these 7 buffaloes came out and killed these lions. And it was not fast. It was not dramatic. It was not particularly exciting. It was quite harrowing. And so as I was watching it, I started writing it.
Oh, wow.
So to get yourself in the zone, if you see something amazing or hear something amazing, as soon as you can, when you get back to your computer or your notebook, just make a few notes and file it on.
I love that idea of you saying that sort of the stories come to you around a conversation at a campfire, like you collect these stories. And I suppose, as you say, as an author, as an artist, you are always looking and collecting the stories from everything you see. That's amazing. And obviously a lot easier if the lion kill is right there in front of you.
Yeah, exactly. I talked before about having worked as a journalist. I don't know if the writing style helps you to write fiction, but one thing you're trained to be as a journalist, as you probably know, Kim, is to be an observer, a trained observer. So the more you look and listen and observe, the more material you find for your stories. And it even goes to listening to the way people speak. I'm from Australia, so people's speech patterns as well as their accents are very different in Southern Africa than they are to Australia. And so if I'm going to put that into meaningful, believable dialogue, I have to listen, and I have to pay attention to what people
Yeah,
say.
so you're collecting characters, you're collecting scenery. And what I also loved what you said
Sound,
earlier,
smell, everything.
yeah, about not having a plot. And I think
Yeah.
you've said to me before, Africa is such a perfect place to write a book with no plot because it's so unpredictable and things are happening. To have a plot would be way more limiting. So you
Yeah,
allow it to
that's what I
grow
find.
organically.
Exactly. Some writers do have a carefully mapped out plot and they follow it. And I take my hat off to them. I think if you can write that way, good. I'm sure it saves you a lot of time, but it's not what I can do. But I think the most important thing is if you want to get in the zone like Michelle does, or you're interested in writing, there's no shortcuts. Just do it. Just get out there.
Yeah. So it's about practice, hey? Okay, so we have another question here. What is the most interesting spot in Africa? Because not all your books are set in Zimbabwe, it's all around the continent. So what jumps out at you? What's the essence of Africa, I suppose, to you? Or
yeah, I mean, I think I have numbers. I have different criteria. It's such a tough question, you know. I have different criteria for my favourite spots. I mean, I live near the Kruger Park. I love the Kruger Park because it's teeming with wildlife. It's also teeming with people, but you've got to balance that off. I've set books in the Kruger Park. I love the Zambezi Valley. I think it's probably scenically the most beautiful place I've ever been to. So for scenery, I love that area. I love the emptiness of Namibia. If I want to get away from it all, I go anywhere else. I'll tell you a true story, and this is not just because I am an investor in Nantwich, but at Nantwich, it's set on the brow, just below the crest of a hill overlooking this dam, and there is nothing there. That's part of the attraction. Lots of animals, but nothing else there. And the accommodation is spread out just below the crest of the hill. On the crest of the hill is a grave, an old guy called Percy Durban Crew, who in the colonials' time had the land there, had a farm there, and he's buried there. And you can see why. As soon as you go to the grave, you think, as did I, many years ago, before when Nantwich was a national parks camp, I said to my wife and some friends, "This is where I want my ashes scattered. This place." And now, hopefully, it will happen. I don't say I don't want to die, but
not yet. You've got too many beautiful ideas to keep telling us.
I have an end. I have an end for where I'm going to get my ashes scattered. Now.
Good.
When you see it, you cannot not be moved by this panoramic vista of Africa. As anybody if anyone's never been to the continent, they went to the top of the hill, they would say, "This is it."
One of those places that speaks to your soul. Hey, it kind of gets into your veins and it sort of sits with you. That's why you keep coming back 25 years later.
Right. And there's lots of lines there. So.
Yeah, amazing. But also talking about that vista, and you were saying earlier, show don't tell, and the essence of creating that into words, like bringing that to us in your books it's just really amazing, you know, and you feel like you've been there, like you said before. Okay, so I have another question here from Fiona. She says, which book couldn't you stop writing once you started? One that you just devoured in the creativity?
Yeah, I look, they're all pretty much the same in that my favorite book is whatever one I'm writing at the moment. And again, I guess like my answer about my favorite places, some of them, they've all fired me up at different points during the writing, but there's a couple of memorable ones. I've become, very passionate about African wildlife and causes. So I really enjoyed writing the dog book, The Scent of Fear, because I wanted to show that, there's some good news in the fight against poaching, that these tracker dogs are incredibly successful, and we have them around Wangi as well too, the Conservation Wildlife Fund sponsored. So I wanted to get some good news out there. African Dawn is another book that deals very much with the recent history of Zimbabwe, and I was incredibly motivated and passionate about that story, mainly because I wrote it because some Zimbabwean friends asked me to. It's not all nice stuff that happens in there, as anyone would know who's associated with Zimbabwe. There's been so much sadness, but it was a book that meant a great deal to
Yeah.
me. Safari is set at Nantwich, and as with that bathtub scene, I was living that book. I mean, I was, if I could
Amazing.
have written in the bathtub, I probably would have. And then
I
other
believe
books that I've
you.
written, other books that have been fun to write. You know, I wrote a
Yeah.
book called Ivory, which is about pirates, and that's the most fun book that I wrote. It was like it was a pirate story. It was fun,
Yeah.
you know.
But this is
But
what I love. Sorry to interrupt you. This is what I love about your books though, is that they're not sort of they, like the tracker dogs one, talking about poaching and using the dogs is such an interesting perspective. Like your perspectives from your storytelling are just so unique and wonderful. There's a lot of people trying to write about Africa because it is a storyteller's muse. And I
it
just
is,
love the way that you do it. It's very inspiring in
yeah.
terms of perspective.
And the good thing about the continent is it's so diverse, you know. So I've done books set in Namibia because I love Namibia and I want to show
Yeah.
the Namibia to the world, you know, and I want people to know what a great country it is.
So maybe last question here, Tony. So you're talking about writing about different places in Africa. I assume maybe you've been to all of them, maybe not. So Christine here asked the question, how do you describe a place that you've actually never been to?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So it's only happened, well, once or twice. So there's a scene in a bit of safari is set in the Democratic Republic of Congo in the Virunga National Park where they have mountain gorillas. I wanted to set the book there because it was a very, and still is, unfortunately, a very volatile area. You know, unfortunately, there are a number of national parks rangers just killed there recently. It's an incredibly volatile place. Now, I wanted to mention the mountain gorillas. Now, I had seen the mountain gorillas not long before I wrote Safari in Uganda, but I wanted to set the book across the border from Rwanda in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So what I did was I got in touch with some people who'd been there, in particular an aid worker who had lived in the town of Goma. And I got her to help me with my research. And more importantly, I got her to proofread the sections that I had set in the DRC. So people have said to me, oh, you've been to the DRC because you know there's a big Primus beer sign in the middle of town. I said, no, somebody told me that. So with one or two exceptions, my next book, Last Survivor, which comes out in July in Australia and September in the rest of the world, actually starts off in Mali. In the West African country of Mali, which has a big problem with elephant poaching at the moment to fund terrorism. Now, I haven't been to Mali, and to be quite honest, I was probably a little bit too chicken to go to the remote deserts of Mali where this elephant poaching is going on. But I've got a friend called Nigel who was working there as an anti-poaching, training anti-poaching rangers. And Nigel gave me a few tips on Mali and what I should put in the book there. It's only a small part of the book. It's quite pivotal to the story, but I didn't need to travel there. So if anybody out there is interested in writing a book set in Africa and you haven't even been to Africa, or you've been to some parts of the continent but not others, don't let that stop you, because the way I research a country is, sure, you can read a bit about and have a look on the internet, but there's no substitute for talking to someone who's been there. So if you can track down a local or someone who's lived there, they, without a doubt, hand on heart, will be the best source of research that you can get. No one knows their own town like a local does.
That's great. And again, it goes back to you collecting your stories through conversations. So,
exactly. And so when you talk to the person who's been there, you say, how do people talk there? What's some slang they use? What does it smell like? What does it sound like? What does it look like? And so
back to your five senses.
Yeah, exactly. Engage the senses. Nigel tells me about open drains and things. So that's a very strong smell that he associates with. The lady who worked in the DRC said everybody drinks Guinness and Coca-Cola. And I'm like, what? Are you kidding? She says you have to have characters drinking Guinness and Coca-Cola in the book. So I did. And so people read the book and say, yes, I had Guinness and Coca-Cola.
Because it's quite a bold thing to write about somewhere where you don't know and be able to be authentic and it come across,
Yeah, I think writers do it all the time. And it's just a matter of engaging those senses, show, don't tell, have the right amount of description. Stephen King also says a few well-chosen details will stand for the rest. So if you're going to describe a country or a town or a place like Nantwich, if I was describing Nantwich and I say outdoor bathtubs, anybody who's been to Nantwich will know that straight away. It's a little detail. You don't need everything, but something that engages something.
Yeah.
So as I said, you don't, if you think about writing and you want to write about some exotic location you haven't been to, you don't have to. I mean, what I find works for me well, ideally, is being in the places where I write. It's not essential, but 99.9% of the places in my book, Christine, I have been to.
Yeah, that's the optimum for a writer, to be sitting in that space.
Particularly these days.
Yeah, particularly these days. There's another question here. Oh no, I've lost it. Oh, here we go. From Neville Jones. If you don't plan your plot, how do you know when the story is finished? Towards the end, do you start concentrating on resolving the story? Which is quite an interesting question, because how are you making it grow to that, I suppose, the climax of the story and then resolution?
Neville, you see right through me. So I've had my publisher say to me a couple of times, did you just get to 120,000 words and think you should finish this book? And I go, yes, maybe. You know, it is difficult. That's the challenge of not having a plot. And it's part of the fun, is not knowing how it's going to end. I literally, when I start writing a book, do not know who the baddie is. So if you don't know who the baddie is when you start reading one of my books, good, fantastic, because I didn't know either. Okay? But at the end, you have to start, yes, Neville, you have to start wrapping it up. And it's not easy. It's probably, for me, the hardest part of the book is tying together all those loose ends that you have inadvertently created by not having a plot. But it's part of the fun. If I start reading a book, you know, I don't want to know how it's going to end. Where's the fun in that? When I'm writing a book, why should I need to know the end? Where's the fun in that? I think I would rather surprise myself. If I can surprise myself, if I can surprise my wife in the next room, hopefully I can surprise you.
That's such a fun way to write, because you are going on this journey yourself, going, "Ooh, what's going to happen next?" When you sit down every day to write, it remains exciting for you as well.
And sometimes, Kim, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I hope I know what's going to happen next.
Yeah, that's so great. That's so great. Okay, amazing, Tony. It's been so much fun to speak with you and get these incredible tips. So I think what we're going to do is, all those people who are listening today, we are going to put out a little writing challenge, a little story, encourage you to write a little paragraph yourself. So we're going to pop up a couple of pictures of Africa on our Facebook page, and we encourage you to engage with these pictures and use the tips, the inspiring tips that Tony has given us today: show and don't tell, using your 5 senses, the smells, the feelings. So we'd like you to take us to Africa. Since we can't travel at the moment, we can travel through our words. Perhaps you can write a paragraph that allows us to travel to these spaces. So we've got show, don't tell, then we've got the description, and
a little bit of dialogue, maybe. You might want to put in someone saying something about the location, you know, put it into someone's words, and a bit of narration, yeah.
Yes, and a bit of narration. And then Tony, if you would be so kind to be able to read these paragraphs and perhaps give some tips, and then there will be a prize for a 20% discounted holiday with Hideaways, which is very exciting. And perhaps, maybe like Tony, you travel to Africa as a tourist and leave as a professional writer.
And I'll throw in a free book as well.
Yes, and a Tony Park book. I'm actually going to enter. Is that okay? Okay, so it's been really lovely to speak with you, and I hope we get to again. Maybe you can continue the lesson and the inspiration of writing about somewhere that we all love very much.
I'd love to. And please, people, send us your feedback. If you are interested in more about how to write, I would be very happy to continue this. It's obviously a huge topic to cover, and we can't cover it all in one session today. For my friends and readers who've joined us, something a little bit different. I hope you've enjoyed that. And I'll continue to look for other ways to do things a little bit differently. So thank you, Kim, and thanks to Hideaways for having me.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Tony. Have a beautiful day.
You too.